All right, we will go ahead and get started tonight. This is our last presentation of our Everyday Gardener series that we have. Tonight we have Alexis Sheffield, the Boyle County horticulture agent, and she will be teaching us a lesson on 4 seasons of landscaping. So we'll go ahead and let Alexis get started on her presentation.
Awesome, I'll share my screen here. All right, you guys should be seeing what I'm seeing at this point. Okay, so we're going to talk about perennials and kind of 4-season landscaping today. Of course, your 4 seasons are going to be mostly perennials, so that makes sense, but I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about the basic general things for landscaping. I promise I won't talk your ear off too much about this. I know a lot of these things that you all know already, but maybe you'll pick up 1 or 2 little keys here. So we're going to talk about why we landscape, basic landscape concepts, your top 5 mistakes, how to look at your space to figure out, what mistakes you can avoid, adding natives into your space. And then we're going to start talking about that year-round interest, which you all came for. And this is focused more on structural plants and not necessarily bedding plants. And so I might chat on them briefly. But we're talking trees and shrubs for the most part on this, but I can't help but throw in a few annual flowers here and there. So why we landscape, this is pretty simple. We know this, but I like numbers. And so one thing I like is that, this major study was done by the nursery industry, and it estimated that your landscaping adds as much as 15% to the resale value of your home. And I know a lot of us are buying and selling right now. There's a reason why when you go to a home, you usually see nice landscaped, manicured setup. My favorite thing when I was looking for a house was when I would show up and all of the plants were so new, they still had the little brand new plant tags on them, which always made me chuckle. So this is important. And also, as plant people, it's something that just can bring you a lot of joy into your life. And so some basic landscape concepts. So the residential landscape is made up of course, different elements. We have plant material, and then we have physical structures, which a lot of people call hardscape. So these are, your patios, your walls, your fences, things like that. And then we have these different plant types that we incorporate, and depending on your space, you're going to have more or less of probably all of these items. So of course you have your trees, shrubs. You might have ground covers of some kind, vines usually going up, but some people use vines more as a ground cover. And then you often have annuals, perennials, and some of us even have ornamental grasses we use to hide things or just because they're easy to incorporate. So now we're going to talk about sort of how to prepare to put in those plant types. And the biggest one, my favorite thing to talk about, and literally I teach a whole session on soil for people. And I have, if you might have seen it, if you've done any of the webinar Wednesdays throughout, but soil is really important, right? It's the foundation at which our plants live. So if you don't take care of it, if you don't prepare it properly, it's not going to make your plants thrive, right? So a few things. You never want to work your soil when it's wet. That is why a lot of farmers you'll see especially work their soil in the fall. And so if you're wondering why they do that, it's because, well, if you've ever spent a spring in Kentucky, it rains a lot. And so it can be really hard to get in there when the soil is dry. If you're not sure if your soil is dry enough, you can do the squeeze test. And that's simply grab a handful of soil, squeeze it together. If that ball doesn't kind of start to fall apart when you let your hand go out, then it's too wet to work. If it sticks together, it's too wet to work. You never, ever, ever want to add sand to your soil. If you are living in Kentucky or pretty much anywhere where sand isn't a normal thing, you probably have clay. And what my civil engineer husband would be very proud of me for knowing is that in concrete, 2 of the active ingredients are things like sand and clay particles. Now they're a little bit different, and he could go into depth here, but what you get when you combine those 2 together ends up being essentially like concrete. All right. So never add sand into your soil. That's just not something we recommend, at least for Kentucky people. You want to till the soil to about a depth of 6 to 8 inches. Most of your plants, even your trees, are going to be in the top 6 to 8 inches. The root systems are going to be in the top 6 to 8 inches of soil. Trees, of course, are going to go a little bit deeper, but really the top 20 inches is where you're going to get most, if not all, of your root structures on trees, shrubs, annuals, perennials, all of that. And so making sure you're loosening that top 6 to 8 inches up is really important. Incorporating organic matters or amendments prior to planting can be really good. And you can do that and incorporate that with that tillage that you're doing. Or if you're doing no-till, this is something where we'd be getting into gardening side more of your vegetable gardening. I could do a whole session on no-till and that, but in this case, for your perennials that you're not going to move around a lot, you can till in those organic amendments. That's compost, even potting soil can be good sometimes to incorporate if you have heavy clay, peat moss, things like that can be really good to add into your soil. You can blend in offsite topsoil with your subgrade soil. And so I say avoid layering here. What we want to avoid is and I see this a lot in new construction. So new construction, they usually end up selling your topsoil. They scrape it off from around your home, right where you're going to put bedding plants and landscaping at. They scrape that off and they sell it to somebody who bags it and then sells it back to you. So if you are going to build a home in the future, make sure you say, I want to keep my topsoil. Okay. So just a little tip there, but what you want to avoid is they have scraped that off. You have a subsoil layer, which is typically in Kentucky going to be a heavy clay layer. What we don't want is to get this layer of good topsoil just sitting on top of that clay. That clay becomes like a hard pan and can really cause problems when we want water to permeate down through. And so that's where some of that tillage can happen, just to kind of break up that subsoil and to mix in some of that topsoil that you bring in to better allow water to permeate and get down through, so you don't have drainage issues down the road. Lawns, I will be the first person to tell you I am not a lawn girl. I don't understand lawns in general, but I do know there's rights and wrongs to it. And when I say I don't understand, I mean I'm not a lawn person. Whatever is in my lawn, I let be. But I know a lot of people really want that good golf course looking lawn. And so there are some do's and don'ts into getting that. And so one is not seeding too heavy. You get too much competition happening and those plants die out. You do want to plant at the recommended time. So we're pretty much at the end of that window here in at least the central part of Kentucky. If you're in the western part of the state, the southern part of the state, you might be able to hit a warm window there for seeding. Make sure you're preparing your seed bed properly. You're breaking up any thatch. If you're putting down sod, you're making sure your roots are going to have good soil contact. Making sure you're watering accurately, which is why we like to seed now, because we get plenty of rain over winter that allows that fescue to really establish while it's cool. And then consider tolerant ground covers, shade tolerant ground covers in shaded areas. I think one of the biggest calls I get, other than weed problems with turf, is that they have a shady area and they want a grass that will live. And my first question is, why does it have to be a grass? Can you put some sort of ground cover that's, low, you don't have to mow, low maintenance? Can you leave that moss that's growing? Can you make it thrive and look really good? So what are some alternatives that you're willing to deal with that could fit your maintenance schedule? For trees and shrubs, the don'ts here, the biggest one, at least for me personally, is going to be don't leave your burlap. Don't leave your wire cages. Don't leave nylon cord. There should be nothing separating that root ball from the hole that it's going in. A lot of people think that burlap is okay because it's an organic thing that usually breaks down. But here's kind of a little reminder here for you. That burlap is meant to stay on that tree for a long period of time, right? At the nursery, it's wrapped. So it's been treated with something that's going to preserve it. And so by the time that burlap does break down, you're going to already have root problems happening, because it's going to be, a year or more before that burlap breaks down. You're going to get circling roots. You're going to have problems, girdling issues down the road. And so make sure there is nothing separating you. If you've got a nice loose root ball, which is beneficial and something you want to see, pop that tree down or that shrub down into the hole, and then pull your burlap, kind of slip it out from underneath while it's in the hole. That's the trick to doing that. That's usually the question I get with how do I plant. Make sure you're covering your nursery stock while it's in transit. And so there can be a lot of damage done from the nursery to your home. So make sure it's tied up safely, it's covered, anything to keep those branches from breaking in the process of moving it. Consider your mature plant size. This is the one of the big questions I get usually in the summer, is that this plant is way too big. It's up against my house. It's getting in my gutters, whatever that situation is. And they end up having to cut the plant down, which is always a shame. So make sure you know how big that tree or that shrub can get. Just because it takes 20 years to get that size doesn't mean that you are just going to let it grow improperly during that time. Make sure you're planting at the proper depth. So you want to look for the root flare. So in this picture, you can see the root flare is exactly what it sounds like, where that tree trunk goes from straight down to flaring out. And so you want to make sure that root flare is above ground. You're planting at and keeping the root ball right at the top of the soil level. Don't plant too deep, but also not too high where those roots are exposed. Make sure that you're spreading out roots if you can. Sometimes it's difficult, I know, with ball and burlap trees, but usually potted trees and shrubs can be easier to do. And if you have anything obviously circling or going to cause a problem in the future, you can go ahead and cut it off. You're not going to do enough damage to the plant by cutting off, one or two roots typically. And then make sure you know where your utilities are. Mulching. Mulching. I'm that girl who walks around Danville and after they've been mulched and is like pulling mulch back away from the trees. I think we've got them, the guys on the crew trained up to mulch properly, but every once in a while I find some and I'm that person outside moving mulch. So don't judge me, but you want to make sure not to apply mulch too deep, this is going to be really hard to do, but too deep next to the trunk can be a problem. And so you can put several inches on that, out to the drip line of your trees or shrubs, usually without having any problem, as long as it's the type of mulch that lets water get through and doesn't shed. So things like pine needle mulch, a lot of the time those long pine needles will actually web themselves into each other in a way that sheds water, which is not something we want. So we wouldn't be putting those down too deep, but something like a hardwood mulch usually will be fine. Don't create mulch volcanoes. We want mulch donuts, not mulch volcanoes. Volcanoes are bad. Donuts are delicious. All right. So that's how I remember. And as you can see here in this picture, we have the happy tree. And what you can see here is your donut in the middle where that mulch has been pulled away from the tree base. And then you've got your thick mulch here. This is volcano mulch. Because it goes up the tree trunk, which is what we don't want. So you get rot, you get disease issues, you can get voles that are tunneling through that mulch and will girdle your tree by eating the bark. So lots of bad things can happen when you volcano mulch. Don't apply black plastic or weed mat fabric around landscape fabric or landscape plants. So black plastic, when I refer to black plastic here, I mean the stuff that doesn't let water or air through. It is a thick material, and it is something that you could hold water in, right? There's no movement. And so you don't get water moving down into the root system and you don't get air moving down, right? Your roots breathe just like we do. And so you need to make sure you've got good airflow and good water movement through that. Now, Weed mat fabric normally will do that, right? It's porous. It might be a tarp material, or in some cases, people will use the more fabric material. Hate that stuff. And that by itself is fine because it lets water go through, it lets air move through. But most people don't want to see black weed fabric around their trees. So they want to cover it with mulch. Well, that mulch breaks down and then it's not able to get down to the root system to improve that soil. And what you end up having is just weeds on top of it. And then you have to go back and pull all that out. So either you're going to just mulch it or you're going to see that black fabric. You kind of have to make that decision. And then, yes, again, donut mulching, not volcano mulching. Improper pruning practices. So we want to make sure I say this, so there's one exception to this rule. Do not share your shrubs into geometric shapes. The one exception is there are boxwoods and there are some spruce varieties that have been bred to tolerate these geometric shapes. Doesn't mean they really like it. It just means they tolerate it, okay? So if you have to have it, make sure you're getting a plant that has been bred to do that tolerating. Otherwise, you're gonna have really bad disease issues. You're gonna have insect pressure, all those bad things. Don't top your trees. Don't do it. Just don't, okay? It's awful for them. You get really weak branches down the road. You end up having to cut the whole tree down themselves. I know a lot of our power line companies do that. So make sure you're keeping any tree species away from your power line so that they don't have to come through and top them, or get something that's going to mature at a height underneath those power lines. Don't prune your early spring flowering shrubs before they bloom. So things like quince, things like forsythia, we're going to talk about these here shortly. Don't prune them before they have flowered because you're just going to prune all the flower buds off. So wait to prune those guys until after flowering. If you have something that flowers in the summer or later, you can prune those in that February, early March timeline. Make sure you're not prematurely cutting the leaves off of any spring flowering bulbs. Don't tie or braid them. So I know we've been talking about shrubs here, but we're going into the daffodil type situation. And I often see people braiding those up, doing things like that. When you do that, you limit the photosynthesis that's happening, which means it's not putting food down into that bulb for next year, which means you probably won't get any bloom next year, or you'll get just really wimpy looking flowers. So just leave them be. They're gonna look ugly for a few weeks. When they're completely yellow, you can mow them down and forget about them until next spring. And then make sure if you get trees, I see this a lot in our box store type trees, just ones that have been improperly trained at the nursery. You can eliminate your multiple competing leaders. And so if you look in this picture here, that bottom at the incorrect pruning where it says ABC, those are 3 leaders. We don't want that. We want to have 1 leader like you see in this correct pruning. The leader is just the main guy in charge, all right? That creates good branch angles and we keep from getting really bad splits in windstorms and things like that. So when you're thinking about your space and what to plant as we go through these plants, in this PowerPoint for each season, I want you to think about shade versus sun. Most of us have a shady area and a sunny area, some larger than others. So think about shade versus sun in that area you want to plant. What is your water access? Because even a perennial that tolerates, drought and things like that is going to need water to get established. So that first year of a minimum, you want to make sure you can get water to that plant. So if that means you're dragging 100, 200 feet of hose out to it, are you willing to do that? Some people aren't. And so maybe you need to move that plant a little bit closer or figure out a better way to get water to it. Visibility, don't plant tall stuff in front of short stuff, simple things like that. And then visibility as far as things you want to see when that plant reaches maturity. What your soil is like. Is it heavy clay? Is it more loamy? Does it stay wet for a long period of time, or is it a place that almost never gets water? It just runs right off. What are your maintenance goals? Are you willing to prune it more than one time? Do you never want to have to deal with it? Things like that. Traffic. So this can be important for anything, your ground covers, your turf, things like that you're going to walk on consistently. And then make sure you're putting the right plant in the right place. And that means you're taking into account all of these things that I just mentioned. Landscape style, I'm not going to go into this in depth, but we kind of divide these into 3 different ones. That traditional geometric style. We have the more natural, diversified, minimal turf type situation. And then you have your going wild, which is for those of you who just kind of want to let nature do what nature's going to do, with maybe a little boost, a little help from you. And so I like to say to add natives. And so as we go through these plants, I have highlighted in yellow the ones that are native and that are great additions to your 4-season landscaping. So we can get really great local beauty. These plants are adapted to our soils, our climates, our insects and disease problems. You're just going to have less issues with your native plants. You can encourage diversity and conservation. Of course, we always think of monarch butterflies when we talk about conservation and things like that, but there's all types of different insects, bees that really thrive from native plantings. And then of course, wildlife. So if you like to see the birds in the winter, if you want to have more butterflies in your garden, things along those lines, plant native plants. Okay, so we're going to go through spring, summer, fall, and winter, and we're just going to jump right in. So your spring flowers are the classic, your bulbs, your corms, your tubers, right? So we're thinking about tulips. There's so many in every color, shape, and size at this point. The Parrot series and Charming Beauty are some of my favorites. Charming Beauty is this yellow up here at the top, and to me, it looks very peony-like. A lot of the breeding has shifted in tulips to peony shaped tulips. And I mean, some of these pink, well, really any color, but there's a pink one that just, it'll dupe you anytime. Narcissus, also known as daffodils. So daffodils, a lot of us, when we hear daffodils, we think of kind of the boring yellow ones that we see in the ditches on the side of the road. But there are lots of different kinds and doubles. They smell delicious. And there's, anything from this a beautiful peach color all the way up to these kind of bright orangey ones like this Tahiti right here. And then you have things like your hyacinths, which of course most of us know, but there are the regular hyacinths that you can get, at Walmart, and you see them in the springtime, but there's also kind of fancier ones. Fritillaria is something you might not be familiar with. These perennialize, which is one of the things I love about them. And there's lots of different colors and shapes to these. Those 2 bottom ones are both fritillaria. So Fritillaria persica is right there on the right-hand side, and it gets pretty tall. So they'll get, 5 foot tall, and you get these big, tall, black, pretty spikes on them, very hyacinth in shape. And then you also have this fritillaria, which is like a checkerboard pattern, very faint on them. And they're just so beautiful. Snakehead fritillaria, they're also known as, but they also come in different oranges and yellows. So look into those. They're very hardy here and come back year to year. And then sweet pea vines can also be something. So there is sweet pea, which is a traditional sweet pea in itself. It is in the pea family, and it is an annual. But then there's what they call a perennial sweet pea, which is not a true sweet pea flower. It is not the same genus and species, but it looks very similar, and it'll come back year after year. Talking about our natives that I like for spring flowers, of course, forsythia, we all know that one, but there are lots of different types out there now, lots of different cultivars. Gold Tide is the one in that top picture, and it is a low growing forsythia, so nothing you're really going to have to do too much pruning on. There are ones that throw out double the amount of blooms per branch. All kinds of good ones out there. So don't knock forsythia just because it's kind of an old classic. Of course, your lilacs, there's some of my favorite varieties there that do well in this area. Viburnum, look, if you don't know what to put, if you need a shrub, then you know what to put there. I'm telling you, there's a viburnum for the job. Do you want flowers? Do you want evergreen? Do you want big? Do you want short? Do you want pink? Do you want it to smell good? You know, do you want fuzzy leaves? Do you want glossy leaves? There are so many viburnums out there. I'm a huge fan of them and all that they do. And they are just so hardy of a plant. Pretty much any that you get is going to be easy to grow here. And so, you know, if you're not sure what to put, there's a viburnum for the job. Mock orange is another really beautiful one. It's going to have big white, almost dogwood-like blooms. It's very beautiful. The whole plant gets white and it's just very fragrant. Flowering crabapple, Everest in particular. Everest is here in this middle picture, and it is just very, very showy early in the spring. And then, of course, we get into things like our red buds, which there's red buds that are different colors now. So you can look into those. Hawthorns fringe tree is right here at the bottom of the screen. It's got those very smoky like blooms, very delicate looking. Dogwood, of course, we have native dogwoods. Sassafras is one that is a little bit more unusual. Serviceberry is a really great one. It very much resembles a flowering crabapple to me, and those berries are edible. And then pawpaw. So I throw pawpaw in there, even though the flowers are really like a chocolate brown cocoa color. It's still an interesting thing to have, something unusual to put out there. Plus you get fruit, and then the fall color on a pawpaw is just gorgeous. When we talk about mounding plants, we have Solomon seal. I like the variegated one. You can see there in that picture. Of course, peonies, poppies are a good one, and they have beautiful pods that are very intricate and great to use and to dry as well. Foxglove, of course, is another one. Foxglove is a biennial, so one thing to keep in mind, you'll have to let it go to seed or replant it every other year. Hellebores, and I mentioned those again in winter interests, and so we'll talk about those a little bit more later. Columbine is, of course, one of my favorites and is a really great native. Sweet Rocket is up here in this right corner. It is one of those wild flowers, purple, anywhere from like a lilac to kind of a vibrant purple is Sweet Rocket. Does well in shady areas. Nigella, also known as Love in a Mist, is one of my favorites. It self-seeds, does well in shade and full sun. And so it creates, and it has these really pretty pods on it as well. And then Larkspur is another one that will self-seed, and you can just kind of have that, you know, spring wildflower look if that's something that you're going for. For summer flowers, again, we talk about bulbs, corms, and tubers for these. You've got dahlias in that middle photo. These have to be dug every year if you want to keep them, but it's an easy way to divide and have more from year to year. Gladiolus are one of my favorite. Again, something that comes in literally any color on the color wheel, pretty much they have at this point. Lilies, whether you get Asiatic, you can get Oriental or Trumpet. These are typically perennials, which is really nice and can add, you know, quite a lot. They're your wow flowers in your garden. Vines, of course, Rose. Colette here's on the top. She's more of a traditional garden rose style, very fragrant, something to climb. Passion flower is a native. We've probably all seen passion flower before. It's just a very intricate thing, has edible pods on it. People make jellies and things like that out of it. Wisteria, there is a native wisteria, an American wisteria. If you're going to plant wisteria, plant the American one, okay? Because the Asian wisteria will destroy what you put on it. So the Arboretum, as an example, has a huge pergola. I mean, I don't know how many people will fit underneath that, but 10 people could stand underneath it and not touch each other easily. And they have 2 wisteria vines on it, one on each corner. And it is the Chinese, and they have had to reinforce that structure twice now in the past 10 years with, I think they're at, last time I was there, they were at like 4x6s or something crazy, some very large thing they had to reinforce because that wisteria is cracking the beams on that really large, very well built pergola. So just be careful with that one. Crossvine is a good one. You can see that in that bottom corner. Mrs. Jekyll or Tangerine Beauty, they're really pretty. They're very vigorous, but they are a native, so we don't consider it invasive. We just call it vigorous. Clematis is another native. There are native clematises. Autumn clematis is one of them. Now, the big purple showy ones and things like that aren't a native variety, but they are still good for our pollinators. And then, of course, trumpet honeysuckle. So I say honeysuckle and people panic. We have native honeysuckles that are not nearly that Asian honeysuckle vine or that bush that we deal with. Okay, so there are good honeysuckles. Not all honeysuckles are bad. Other summer flowers from the shrubs and trees. So of course, roses, distant drums is one that is very, very hard to find, but it's quite beautiful. Goat's beard, you can find Aruncus. I am obsessed with it. You can find that in that upper right-hand corner. It's very Astilbe-like as far as how the blooms look to me, but it is gets much larger and tolerates full sun. Butterfly bush, of course, is a good one. Aronia, also known as chokeberry, gets really lovely berries on it that are, again, edible. A lot of people make Aronia wine or jam or jelly, things like that. They are kind of astringent, hence the chokeberry name, and they do get great fall color on them. Button bush, one of my favorites, it likes a wet area, which is one of the reasons I put it on here. So if you have a spot that is by a downspout or anything like that, these guys grow naturally by lakes and things along those lines. Crepe myrtles are a good one. Pepper bush, clethra, which is in this top left-hand corner. It does have some evergreen attributes if we have kind of average winters, and has those really pretty blooms on them. And then of course rose mallow is our in the hibiscus family, as you can tell, and it likes wet areas as well, and it has a whole range of colors from, you know, kind of white to red, as well as dark and green foliage. I have this one exactly at my house. As far as, I won't go through every single one of these, but I want to talk about the natives for mounding perennials. Yarrow, lots of different shades of yarrow these days, not just white and yellow like a lot of people are used to, but kind of every pastel shade you can think of. And Amsonia is a really pretty one. Phlox, Liatris is in this top picture, also known as gay feather. False indigo or Baptisia. Again, a lot of breeding has been done at these. It has white, yellow, even muddier colors, and then kind of a different lavender to this blue purpley color. Echinacea, penstemon is another really beautiful one. Rattlesnake master might be one that you're not used to, is this bottom picture of these white thistle-like. It is a plant that does well and tolerates really dry conditions. It kind of tolerates just about anything. It won't take soggy, but anything from kind of average to very dry. It is going to look, it's one that can look very out of place for a lot of our Kentucky gardens, because the foliage itself is very cacti in look, but it is something that is native here. We get a lot of different bee and wasp species that just really love this plant. And so I encourage people to do that one. Joe Pye weed is another one they've done a lot of breeding on. I'd recommend Little Joe if you're going to grow it, because Joe Pye weed can get 8 foot tall, as you've probably seen on the side of the road. But Little Joe is more going to be the 3 to 4 foot range, and is something people can use a lot more in most of their landscape beds. And it is just a really pretty mauve color that kind of goes with everything. For your annuals, and these can fit into your perennials, but it's more of a self-seeding annual. This milkweed gay butterflies is going to be one, but any of the milkweed species will be fine. Just remember that some of them are going to be more aggressive than others. So if you're not willing to have it anywhere, make sure you do your research as to which one is going to be better for you. Jumping down into fall flowers. So of course, hydrangea. And when we think of fall, we're not only thinking of flowers, but we're also thinking about fall color in the leaves. And so there's some things that can be both. Oak leaf hydrangea is going to be a native for us. So it's Hydrangea arborescens. One of my favorites, oak leaf. And again, lots of good breeding that's been done to have smaller ones. The traditional can be, 20 feet wide. But there's some now and they've got double flowers on them and they're just absolutely stunning. So definitely look into hydrangeas. Russian sage is going to be something that's really pretty in that August, September timeframe. Again, viburnum, just obviously viburnum. Brandywine is a really good one. Caryopteris is one. For vines, these are going to be cup and saucer and love and a puff are both annual vines, but I like to throw them in there because they kind of do their cool stuff in the fall. Cup and saucer is there on the top and love and a puff is down there. It has those pretty Chinese lantern-like seed pods on them, and then hops. And so if you're looking for something to cover a trellis, it's not going to have showy blooms. It does have those pretty hop pods on them. It's not going to be over the top like a wisteria will be, but it can grow and is a perennial vine here for us and can cover a structure quite well. Asters are going to be a great fall flower, and there's asters that start blooming in September that will bloom all the way into November. And so if you're really wanting some color really late in the year, asters are a great way to go, and they are a Kentucky native. They tolerate a lot of crap from us, so asters are good ones. Sedum, one of my most favorite just plants in general. I love different sedums, lots of variety there. And they are just kind of pretty from spring all the way through fall. Goldenrod. Goldenrod is one that people a lot of the time associate with wildflower. That's because it is a Kentucky native flower. You see it pop up. It is our state flower, which I'm sure you all know, but there are a lot of good goldenrods that aren't nearly as aggressive. They're not going to spread all over the place. Crown of Rays is a great one, and it stays a little bit shorter, more compact. So you get a lot of showiness kind of in a smaller area. Rudbeckia, a lot of us know Rudbeckias, of course, black-eyed Susans, but there's tons of breeding that's been done. This one in the top right corner is Sahara, and it is one of my favorites because I love those big puffy, and it's different kind of muddy shades, and they're mauvey and gold, and I love them. And Cherry Brandy is another good one down here in this left corner, nice rich rust color. Muley grass is a native grass. So if you're really looking for a native that's not going to take over like pampas grass will, muley grass is a good one. And then Japanese anemone, this pink here, it also comes in white, is a really great fall bloomer. You're going to get that one usually around September, and it likes shade. All right, and now jump into winter. I know we're cold. I know we're I'm still craving color. And so winter interest is a great thing to have included in your garden. And these things, some of them they have other benefits throughout the year, whether it's leaf color, anything like that, but they're really the all-stars of winter. So Nandina, we all usually know Nandina, but it gets great color. It gets those berries on them. I'm a big fan of the standard Nandina. I don't like the little tiny ones that you see in the McDonald's drive-through. I want the big traditional Nandina that's 6 foot tall and just gorgeous in the fall. And then in the winter time, you get this just big clusters of red berries. So don't off Nandina just because McDonald's decided to put it in every drive-through it has. Winterberry ilex, and so this is a holly. And it is a deciduous holly. You can see it up here in the red berries in the right hand corner. It also comes in like a gold, deep gold color and kind of different shades of red. The one thing you want to know with hollies, of course, is that you have to have a male and a female. So make sure that you're getting a pollinator that goes with it. It will lose all of its leaves and have these big red clusters that are great in wreaths, but also if you can leave them on the plants, they'll be super showy for several months in the winter time. Witch hazel, a Kentucky native that I'm obsessed with. I love the greenery early in the year, and I just love in February when you see these neon, weird looking spider creatures that are coming out, and the bees really love it. And so this is something when we get those really warm January, February days and the bees are out foraging, there's not a whole lot for them. So if you're somebody who really wants to feed the bees, witch hazel is a really great thing. Red twig dogwood, there's also yellow twig dogwood. It is a native here. It really pops against snow. Beautyberry, I have the purple beautyberry here. This one is most likely the Oriental in this picture. The American looks the same. It's just usually not quite as showy. It also comes in a white. You can have white berry clusters. And then flowering quince, of course, is going to be your late season, late winter interest. A few more here for you. I told you I'd talk about hellebores. If you haven't looked at hellebores lately, they come in all of the doubles and all of the shades and, from black to bright red at this point. You can see there the pinks and the greens, and there's just so many different ones. And they are what my soul needs in the January, February time, is this kind of pop of color out in the landscape. They're super hardy, put them in a more shady area, have them for years and years and years and years. Firethorn, Yukon Bell is a good one. It is this orange berry up here. Some of them do have thorns on them, so make sure you're either putting it in an area you're not going to walk by constantly, or it is going to be something that you're getting a variety that doesn't have thorns. So just, you've been warned. Harry Lauder's walking stick. So this is that bottom corner. It is something that you appreciate for the architecture of it. It loses its leaves. In the spring, it gets these really cool catkins, which is a seed pod, the flower, so to speak, of it. And they look like tiny little pine cones. And they're super pretty. They're vibrant green, but it's just a really interesting architecture to add into your home. And then Hinoki cypress is golden cypress. It comes in a lot of different shapes and sizes. At this point, the breeding on it is incredible, but it has that bright gold tip on it that will be evergreen and just really pops in the winter landscape. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention ferns. So these are all Kentucky. I know a lot of people associate ferns with tropical, but Kentucky has a lot of native ferns. So if you have a shady area that maybe stays a little bit more moist, even some of these will tolerate drier conditions as long as they're in the shade. Pop one of these ferns in there and you'll have something. A lot of these are evergreen as well. And so that's something that you can have even in the winter time. Some resources for you. I can make this PowerPoint available. It's also being recorded so you can watch it. And if I said something that maybe wasn't on the slide, you can always find it. But if you're interested in getting this PowerPoint as a PDF, you're welcome to email me and I'm happy to send it to you. But these are some really great resources for even designing. If you're not sure what to put in, you can go Lexington. The city of Lexington has these really awesome publications, and they have full sun cool flower, full sun warm flower, and as far as your tones go, and they also have those same ones for shade. And so if you're not super creative, which even though I love flowers and I feel like I can landscape anybody's house but my own, these can be super helpful and talk about spacing for those particular plants. So something really helpful. Plant by numbers is what they're called. And then of course we at UK have publications for shady and sunny locations as well.